20 years after New York City firefighter Leon Smith left Ladder 118 in Brooklyn and responded to the burning towers, the pain is still there, just beneath the surface.
All the way back to that day, I saw the towers falling.
Irene Smith, one of countless parents who watched their child turned first responder rush to the scene that bright Tuesday morning.
But I didn't know Leon was in there when the towers was falling.
That's because Leon, a 19-year department veteran, typically helped operate a ladder truck. So for the last 2 decades, Ms. Smith has worked tirelessly toward a singular goal.
I will keep his name alive.
To make sure the country continues to remember the sacrifice of Leon and the 11 other firefighters who looked like him, not remembered or honored more, but the same as the rest of the 343 FDNY members who gave their lives that day.
It's so many people do not even know it was 12 black firefighters.
It's not unique for black firefighters to remember their own.
Ms. Smith and FDNY Captain Paul Washington both say there wasn't just one slight or one incident, but rather the culmination of many over the years. Washington and Ms. Smith recalled to us one nationally televised moment in particular, this scene from an episode of Saturday Night Live.
Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani.
Broadcast in the days after the attacks, featured in a subsequent documentary.
Every last one of which was white except for one. And I think that kind of set the tone. So we feel it's important to put that out there to show that blacks sacrificed and we died at this fire, in this tragedy as well.
Firefighters Gerard Baptiste, Vernon Cherry, Terrell Coleman, Andre Fletcher, Keith Glasgow, Ronnie Henderson, William Henry, Carl Joseph, Keith Roy Maynard, Sean Powell, Vernon Richard, and Leon Smith Jr. 12 black firefighters among the 343 who were killed on 9/11. This story would not be complete without also noting Ms. Smith and the other families of the 12 black FDNY firefighters who died on 9/11 have also watched the department itself change over the last 2 decades.
The fire department has made an effort to increase diversity.
They have.
The culture has changed.
Yes. It is better.
For Ms. Irene Smith, any discussion about her son's ultimate sacrifice must also include the harassment he faced on the job, as well as the department's efforts to improve its culture. It is a conversation that begins and ends with Leon.
It's not a moment. I don't think of Leon. Leon was my only child. His spirit is all around this house.
Now, we reached out to the FDNY Commissioner Daniel Nigra about this story.
Yeah, he sent us a statement that reads, quote, "The department made a solemn promise to never forget the 343 FDNY members who made the supreme sacrifice on September 11th. We honor and remember these 12 firefighters always, and their bravery and sacrifice continue to inspire more young men and women to pursue a career in the FDNY."
This week, Americans across the nation paused to remember and honor the legacy of first responders who we lost on September 11th. MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee and his Into America podcast team take a look at the history of black firefighters in New York City, specifically the fight to remember the 12 who died on 9/11 and the struggle for justice and equity for those who carry their legacy.
Of the 343 firefighters who tragically died on 9/11, 12 were black.
Leon Smith, great guy, always had a big smile on his face.
Captain Paul Washington knew them all.
Captain Vernon Richard. We studied together to become for the captain's exam.
A 33-year veteran of the department, Captain Washington helped recruit, train, and mentor many of them, including Keith Maynard.
That was my friend. I miss Keith.
Washington and Maynard bonded as members of New York's Vulcan Society, an association of black firefighters focused on fighting racial discrimination and building racial equity in the department. Maynard's identical twin, Kevin, remembers their shared mission.
And he and Paul became great friends because they were very passionate about what they were doing.
But just 2 years into his career as a New York firefighter, Keith Maynard was gone, killed along with hundreds of others in the collapse of the Twin Towers.
I was numb, and I couldn't believe it.
Even as the nation mourned together, both Captain Washington and Kevin were struck by the lack of representation in the remembrances.
There was never an image of them throughout the whole deal in 9/11. There wasn't always a picture of him. There's one or two stories, but then it was just forgotten.
For Captain Washington, it was symbolic of a larger problem. People of color make up a majority of New York City's population, but the fire department remains overwhelmingly white.
You know, when you're black on this job, it's just like being black in America. It's difficult. You got to fight to be treated fairly. You got to fight for them to change the policies that kept blacks off of this job for so long.
So Washington focused on the fire department's entrance exam.
There was no way you were going to get on the job in New York if you weren't prepared or if you wasn't exposed to the way the test was given and what to expect.
What was the stance of the city and the fire department?
I mean, we brought these issues to their attention, and they would just blow us off, basically, you know.
The Vulcans and the Department of Justice took their grievances to court, and in 2010, a federal judge ruled that the FDNY used the entrance exam to intentionally discriminate against black and Hispanic applicants, a practice with, quote, deep historical roots. Where are we at now in terms of the diversity of the department?
Well, the numbers have gone up. Blacks now, we're at about 8 or 9%.
Kevin Maynard, now a firefighter in Houston, knows his brother would have been happy to see the changes the Vulcan Society has achieved. Your brother was committed to diversifying the force. Yeah. What's it like for you to come back home and see, you know, brothers and sisters like with that uniform on those engines?
It's twofold, because it's good to see it. So you have that sense of guilt. For me, I think I wanted them to be around to see it.
Now, today's September 11th ceremony was made even more special as the sacrifices of those black firefighters who were lost that day were acknowledged. A special September 11th remembrance.
Firefighter Ronnie Henderson.
As black firefighters of the FDNY who died that day.
Firefighter William Henry.
Are honored for their contributions by Chicago's Black Fire Brigade. It's now been 23 years since the September 11th tragedy cut down New York City's World Trade Center, and with it, the Twin Towers and so many lives. NYC Fire Marshal John Combs, who was a firefighter back then, was there.
It was important that we would hold their names in history. We would honor them by acknowledging them.
Of the 343 firefighters who sacrificed their lives as first responders to the attack, 12 members were African American.
Fire Marshal Andre Fletcher.
Those at today's small ceremony say it's important not to forget the loss, but also the legacy their sacrifice creates for the future.